Good morning, everyone. So today we are considering the story of Jesus's first miracle, turning water into wine at the wedding in Cana. On one level, this story is about a man, a bridegroom at a wedding, being saved from a really embarrassing situation by the kindness and love and power of Jesus. In a culture where hospitality was regarded so highly, it would have been a great embarrassment to the bridegroom to run out of wine at his wedding. It was his job to provide enough. So in this miracle, Jesus saves his host from humiliation by providing more wine for the guests. But in performing this miracle, he also reveals something of his divine identity to his disciples who, as we read right at the end in verse 11, they believe in him. Now, there's two things that I really love about this miracle: the quality and the abundance. An old friend of my brother's is this guy called Dan Bowring, who is a professional magician and also a Christian. Yes, they're not incompatible. 14 years ago, he came to my brother's wedding, and at the reception afterwards, he went from table to table performing tricks for the guests, just like you see him doing on this picture from his website. I have to say that he was pretty impressive, and I still don't know how an object from his hand ended up in my uncle's pocket on the other side of the table. But he didn't do any transformations. Fortunately, at the wedding, we didn't run out of wine, but if we had, I don't think Dan would have been able to help us. In fact, I don't believe any human could have helped us. So the simple fact of Jesus's miracle, turning water into wine, was pretty astonishing. But you know, what completely blows my mind is that Jesus doesn't just change a bottle or a jug of water into wine. That in itself would have been amazing. But he transforms 6 huge jars containing 20 to 30 gallons of water into wine. Now, these jars were used to hold water for ceremonial washing, as the passage tells us, so they were huge. But to put this into context, and based on a more conservative estimate of 20 gallons per jar, that would equate to 545 litres of wine, or around 726 of our standard size bottles of wine. So you can see the guy in this picture picking out a bottle of wine. Look at how many wine bottles are there. It's probably more than 726, but it's a lot. 726 bottles is a lot of wine. I've been to a fair few weddings, but I don't think any of them would have had anything close to that much wine at them. And whilst it's important to remember that weddings in Jesus's time probably lasted for a few days, Jesus performed this miracle sometime into the wedding feast and after the bridegroom's supply, which was supposed to last the whole wedding, had already been finished. So the quantity he supplied really was incredible and probably much more than they needed. But this reminds me of the abundant generosity of Jesus. It also tells me that Jesus liked a good party. He loved having a good time and enabling other people to do the same. He is pointing here to the eternal party that is to come. Secondly, Jesus could have made the wine just about drinkable, but nothing particularly special. As we read in this passage, it was normal for the best wine to come out right at the beginning of the feast, with the cheaper wine being saved for after the guests had had too much to drink. But as the master of the banquet says in verse 10, just after he's had some of this transformed wine, he says, "You have saved the best till now." It's clear from this that while Jesus created even better wine than the very best wine that the bridegroom had provided at his wedding. When Jesus performs a miracle, heaven and earth intersect with each other, and we get a glimpse of the beauty and the abundance of our heavenly home. We could even say that in this instance, perhaps the wedding guests even got a flavour of what is to come. When Jesus blesses people, he doesn't scrimp or give just enough. He blesses abundantly and wholeheartedly. As I've said, this was Jesus's first miracle, which the author John refers to as a sign. He calls them signs because they point us towards something. They point us towards the truth of who Jesus really is. In fact, the whole Gospel of John was written with a single purpose in mind, And we can read this in John chapter 20, verse 31. It says, "But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." Every miracle Jesus performed pointed people towards his identity as the Son of God. And like the disciples in verse 11, many believed. But the greatest of Jesus's miracles centers on his death and resurrection. In verse 4 of our passage today, Jesus tells his mother that the hour has not yet come. He speaks of the hour again in chapter 7 and chapter 8. And each time he's pointing us forward to a sign which has not yet occurred. Then in chapter 12, as he reaches Jerusalem just after raising Lazarus from death to life, in the days that followed, he declares as he reaches Jerusalem, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. In the days that follow, Jesus is arrested, tortured, crucified, and dramatically rises from the dead. The transformation of water into wine is astonishing, but actually it's only a small foretaste of the transformation to come, when Jesus will be transformed from death to life, when Satan is defeated and the power of sin is broken, when all people have access to God through Jesus and can receive the transformational love of God himself. This miracle of water into wine points to the abundance and the perfection of the most remarkable miracle of all time, when Jesus made a way for us to have access to God. Although Christmas might seem like a long time ago, it's only been a month since we were reminded of the events leading up to Jesus's birth. If we remember the angel Gabriel's visit to Mary, her meeting with Elizabeth, the visitation of the shepherds and the wise men, Mary had good reason, even before Jesus was born, to believe in him. She was told he would be the Son of the Most High, the Son of God. So it's perhaps not surprising that at the wedding at Cana that she has confidence in who Jesus is, believing what others have yet to grasp. In verse 5 of our passage today, she tells the servants at the wedding, "Do whatever he tells you." There probably aren't many people in your life for whom you would do whatever they tell you. But if anyone should command that kind of authority in our lives, Jesus should. And the more we get to know him, the more we read accounts of him in the Bible, the more we spend time with him in prayer, the more we see the impact he has on the lives of those around him, the more we get to know him personally, the more we know that we can trust in him. Jesus is good. Jesus is kind. Jesus is gracious and full of love for us. We can trust him. And the more we trust him, the more we will be willing to follow Mary's wise words in verse 5, "Do whatever he tells you." The well-known theologian Tom Wright says that in this story in John 2, it's about transformation, the different dimension of reality, a heavenly reality, which comes into being when Jesus is present and when, as Mary tells the servants, people do whatever Jesus tells them. Transformation comes when Jesus is present and when his people do what he asks them to do. So what does Jesus want us to do? Well, he wants us to follow him and experience life in his name. And how do we follow him? By doing the things that he did. If we want to live out this miracle of Jesus in our own lives, we need to ask ourselves, are we generous in the quality and the abundance of what we give to others? When we give, is it out of our first fruits, out of our best, or is it just the bit at the end, whatever's left? Just as Jesus's miracles were signs pointing us to the truth of who he is, our lives can also be signposts to him, so that when people are blessed through our actions, they can see the love of Jesus and give glory to him. Jesus showed kindness and compassion to all who were suffering. He reached out to those on the margins of society who were shunned by others. He challenged the corrupt authorities and spoke out for the poor and the sinners. He spent time with people. He cared for the sick. He blessed children. He loved people. This lockdown has restricted our capacity to do a lot of things, but perhaps we can think creatively about the ways in which we can support, love, and be a blessing to those around us. As a church, we continue to look for ways to bless our community here in Greystones. And this week, the Bless Greystones team delivered free wellbeing packs to 50 families in our community who'd signed up to receive one through Greystones Primary School. But there are things that we can do as individuals too. I wonder who has God put in your life that you can be a blessing to. By caring for others, we can somehow reflect that abundant, transforming love of Jesus. Transformation comes when Jesus is present and when his people do what he asks them to do.